The biological remembrancer is unavailable. This broadcast is now under the purview of Lex Mechanic Archivist 8.81. Data processing will proceed according to protocol. Calo infirma est. Query. The First Legion, the Dark Angels, their combat doctrine is a thing of cold mathematical beauty, a geometry of death, perfected over 10 millennia. At its heart lies the Inner Circle, a brotherhood of secrets wrapped in mysteries. They are the wardens of a terrible shame, and the masters of a silent, unending hunt. Accessing classified strategic codex, Order of Caliban. Subject designation, the philosophy and combat of the Inner Circle. Commencing data analysis. Analysis, Caliban, a death world isolated for 5 millennia. Its surface is defined by primordial, shadow-haunted woodlands, a planetary-scale ecosystem governed by a single brutal axiom, kill or be killed. The primary threat vector, fauna designated, the great beasts. These were not simple predators, but hyper-lethal chimeras. Each was a singular entity, a species of one, operating outside the parameters of conventional logic, and therefore immune to standard eradication protocols. The consequence of such an environment was a society forged in constant duress. For the human enclaves, terror was not a transient emotional state, it was the baseline of existence. To survive, the scattered human colonies were forced to develop an unbreakable architecture of both combat and mind. A militant, feudal culture was not a choice, but a logical, inevitable outcome of their brutal reality.
The mind and will of a knight are as much weapons in his armory as his sword and pistol.
This axiom is central to the pre-imperial military doctrine known as the Calibanite Mandate, a philosophy divided into 2 core, competing tenets. The first is the spiral. It defines the individual, the path to personal excellence, kinetic weapon mastery, and the navigation of time and existence. The second is the concentric circle. It defines the collective, the architecture of brotherhood, absolute trust, and the spatial defense against total annihilation. Analysis indicates a fundamental paradox. These 2 philosophies, designed to function in harmony, contain the logical seeds of their own inevitable, catastrophic conflict. Analysis. The physical spiral of Alduruk. The inscription is etched deep into the stone, its edges worn smooth by the feet of thousands of warriors over generations. The methodology is one of relentless, structured repetition. Novices walk the spiral, executing preset routines of attack and defense at precise, mathematical stages. The intended result is the complete elimination of conscious thought from the process of combat. Through this process, the movements become a reflexive, unbeatable system. The individual is sublimated, replaced by a biological engine of perfect self-defense. Analysis of galactic history confirms the principle of the endless cycle. The spiral never truly concludes. Where the lines of history should end, they turn back upon themselves, trapping all within. This leads to the constant of historical repetition. Cultures, empires, and even species are condemned to repeat identical conflicts endlessly. Data streams from the Dark Age of technology, the Great Crusade, and the current millennium show identical patterns of hubris, betrayal, and war. This reveals the primary fallacy of mortal ambition, the illusion of finality. Victory is temporary, peace is a statistical anomaly. Violence and struggle do not end, they merely change form and begin anew. Every age of the Imperium is merely a precursor to the next age of darkness. The serpent consumes its own tail, forever. The logical conclusion is that this cycle is not a flaw in the system. The cycle is the system. Analysis of the ritual known as the descent reveals a physical component. Supplicants are required to descend into the catacombs located beneath the structure designated Al-Duruk. Their path is a spiral, demarcated by lit candles. The terminus of this journey is an audience with the entity designated the Lord's Cipher. This physical act is a direct analogue to the prevailing death world religion. According to ancient belief, the soul itself journeys to a conceptual underworld upon cessation of life functions. This spiritual path is also a literal spiral, a recurring motif which presents two possible outcomes: damnation or rebirth. Therefore, to walk the spiral is to accept a fundamental axiom: death is inevitable. This is the burden of knowledge. The logic becomes recursive. If death is a certainty, the only variable is the outcome. The supplicant must not only accept oblivion, but actively choose the path of their own rebirth. Analysis of pre-heresy data slates from Caliban reveals a core defensive doctrine designated the physical circle. In macro architecture, this manifested as concentric fortifications. The great fortresses were built as a series of layered rings. A heavily fortified inner sanctum served as the final bastion, its structures providing overlapping fields of fire across the wider, more vulnerable outer defenses. This philosophy extended from the macro to the micro. The same principle of layered, concentric defense was applied by the knightly orders of Caliban in battlefield tactics. In combat, warriors would form an outward-facing infantry circle, presenting a wall of steel to the enemy from all vectors. This was the primary engagement line. A second, smaller ring of warriors stood back to back with the outer circle. Their purpose was to guard the blind spots of their brethren, protecting them from flanking attacks and covering any breaches in the line. A theoretically perfect defensive formation, impenetrable from the outside. Its fatal flaw, however, was its total vulnerability to betrayal from within. Analysis of the formation designated the trust architecture reveals a structure of interlocking, codependent defensive fields. Each combatant in the outer ring is, by design, compromised. A lethal blind spot is engineered into their position, a deliberate vulnerability at their back. This vulnerability is negated by the inner circle of warriors. Their sole function is to project covering fire, providing 360-degree overwatch. These are the Minar, vectors of trust. The outer warrior must therefore fight without looking back, their survival predicated entirely on the absolute discipline of the man behind him. Herein lies the fatal flaw. It is not a failure of material but of the biological component. A breach in trust becomes a physical breach in armor. Should a single warrior hesitate, should one unit doubt, the defensive geometry shatters. The entire formation is annihilated. Within the pre-heresy Dark Angels Legion, a core tenet was codified, the philosophical circle of absolute brotherhood. It was a doctrine of total, reflexive trust between battle brothers, a system designed for ultimate combat cohesion.
If you cannot look to your brother and know without thinking that you can trust him, then you are lost. For the moment the trust is not instantly reciprocated, the circle breaks and you are dead.
Analysis indicates this was not a mere abstraction. It was a survival protocol forged in the lethal forests of old Caliban. The great beasts of that world could exploit any weakness, any hesitation. Therefore, absolute suppression of individual ego was deemed necessary for the collective to endure. The doctrine assumes the threat is external. The circle is designed to protect from the monster without, but the datalog of history demonstrates the most catastrophic failures occur when the break in trust originates not from a beast in the dark, but from a brother standing in the light. The data presents a theoretical framework, the geometry of war. It posits a duality matrix, bifurcating combat philosophy into two primary axioms. The first axiom is designated the spiral path. Its physical application is individual kinetic mastery, the perfection of a single warrior. Its philosophical implication is the eternal return, the inescapable, repeating cycle of conflict. The opposing axiom is the concentric circle. Its physical application is collective survival through multi-layered defense. Its philosophical foundation is absolute brotherhood, the complete suppression of ego to forge impenetrable trust. One path elevates the individual, trapping them in a cycle of personal glory and doom. The other path erases the individual for the survival of the group. The Matrix presents these as a choice between the self and the collective, but further analysis suggests a flaw in this binary perception. Both paths lead to the same destination: perpetual, unending war. Analysis of historical data from the Death World Caliban reveals a grim, repeating pattern, codified by the seer Lord Sartana as the trap of the eternal return. The cycle begins in isolation. For 5,000 years the human population fought a desperate war of survival against the very world upon which they stood. This constant struggle intensified with the proliferation of nightmare chimeras, warp-tainted fauna that pushed humanity to the brink of total extinction. In response to this existential threat, a unifying force emerged. Figures of legend, Lionel Johnson and his mentor Luther, brought the disparate knightly orders together, forging a single army and launching a crusade to reclaim their world. The crusade was brutally effective. The great forests were scoured, the lairs of the creatures burned. The beasts, which had defined humanity's existence for generations, were hunted to extinction. Victory created a new, unforeseen crisis, a crisis of purpose, a void in the heart of the warrior class, summarized by a single, damning question: what will be of the warrior when there is no more war? The void demanded to be filled. Lacking an external foe, the warriors of Caliban turned their blades upon each other. Kin strife and civil war became the new purpose. The cycle completes itself in self-destruction. The logical, terrible conclusion of this analysis is not that this tragedy occurred once, but that the cycle is inherent, a fundamental flaw in the martial psyche. A trap, designed for eternal return. With the beasts of Caliban dead and the Imperium arriving, the Order's unifying, 5,000-year-old mission evaporated instantly. A purpose, honed over generations, was rendered null. The arrival of the Emperor's imperial truth then actively swept away the ancient wisdom, rituals, and underworld philosophies that had anchored the Calibanite psyche. The old ways were not merely superseded, they were declared invalid, an error to be corrected. Finally, subsumed into the Great Crusade, the humble pursuit of excellence was replaced by galactic ambition. The foundational equality of the Order was shattered, replaced by a new hierarchy measured in conquest and glory. Purpose, tradition, and equality, the three core pillars of their societal geometry, were systematically dismantled. In their place, a structural void was created, a vacuum into which darker influences would inevitably seep. Analyzing the primary vectors for the fracture of trust, the origin point is traced to a singular, potent emotional flaw: jealousy. Luther, once the greatest hero of his age, was reduced to a subordinate existence, living in the eclipsing shadow of the Primarch. This resentment coalesced into a single moment of fatal hesitation. Beneath the Saroshi shuttle, he contemplated an atomic assassination, a definitive act of patricide. This internal corruption did not remain contained. Secret cabals formed, with knights gathering in the shadows beneath the circle chamber. They actively plotted terror attacks against their own imperial allies, a treasonous effort to preserve Caliban's fading independence. In doing so, the fundamental law of the circle was violated. Secrecy replaced transparency, envy replaced brotherhood. The psychological degradation was absolute. Warriors of the Order began to doubt their brother standing behind them, and the foundation of the Legion was irrevocably cracked. Analysis of the presented tactical philosophical model. the grand synthesis. It posits that an engineered brotherhood is the only viable shield against the entropic decay of human history. The first component is designated the churning spiral. It represents the eternal return, the inevitable gravitational pull of humanity toward violence, repetition of past failures, and large-scale self-destruction. The counterforce is the rigid circle. This represents a trust architecture. This engineered brotherhood is theorized as the only construct capable of resisting the crushing weight of historical precedent. The interaction creates a state of perpetual tension. The circle is designated unnatural. Its survival requires constant, active maintenance of trust to withstand the immense, chaotic pressure exerted by the spiral. The logical conclusion is that this brotherhood is not a passive state, but a constant, unending war against the base nature of humanity itself. A single fracture in the architecture would result in total structural collapse. Initiating data analysis. The shattered circle. The geometry of brotherhood, a logical constant, has been fractured. The input variables, secrets and jealousy, flaws inherent to biological systems. The result, the collapse of the protective barrier. Without the stabilizing influence of the circle, the order of Caliban succumbed to the paradox of the eternal return, a cyclical pattern of betrayal and destruction. This outcome was pre-calculated. The prophecy of Lord Sartana is fulfilled. Humanity is doomed to the endless spiral of kin strife. A new iteration of the war subroutine begins. The logic is immutable. Fena metallica perpetitur. The cycles of history are infinite, and our data vaults strive to archive them all. Subscribe to ensure continued access to this knowledge. To prioritize the next data packet for dissemination, leave a comment detailing the law, faction or battle you wish our auspex to scan. Ignorantia est heresis.